Hey there, Christopher, the podcast, Life as a. And if you don't know by now, I'm the guy who spends hundreds of hours every year speaking with professionals and entrepreneurs from all over the world. And I have one singular purpose in mind. I want to uncover tips, insights, all that great stuff for you so you can find your dream job. Anyway, the topic today we're going to get into music. I think a lot of people have an interest in finding a career within the music industry, but the only ideas they can come up with are teaching in a high school classroom. And if that's not for you, fair enough. There are plenty of other options out there. And the guest today, his name is Paul Rudolph, and he illustrates this point wonderfully. In fact, he used to be a high school teacher until he transitioned into what he's doing right now, working for this little program you might be familiar with, Sesame Street. Yeah. Paul himself is a 3-time Emmy awarded sound editor. He's also their vocal music director and composer on the program. And he works with Muppet performers, the likes of Elmo, Cookie Monster, The Count, and so on, as well as all those guest celebrities that make their way over onto Sesame Street. This episode, though, we're going to get into his work. He's going to share some tips, insights, strategies for people like you who love music and want to find other career options in that space. But I do want to remind you, check out the full-length audio version. That's a good solid 60 minutes of conversation on this topic. Whereas this YouTube video, we're coming in a little under 20 minutes. There's a lot more to be heard, so check that out. We're available wherever you access your podcast. Just do that search for Life as a ... All right, well, I do think it is about time to get started here, so why don't we?
It's all about preparing the talent to record or perform vocally. That's pretty much my definition of it, because you can add to for me, vocal music director is very specific to what I do for Sesame Street, but I'm also in certain, I wear different hats. As a music director for Sesame Street, I would consider that the live shows where I'm working with the performers and I'm getting them up to speed on whether it's a classic song that Sesame Street's done, or we're doing a new arrangement of it or some new harmonies. I'll work with them and rehearse that. I consider that's in a broad sense a music director, but I'm dealing with them specifically vocally on Sesame Street, like when I'm recording them, pre-recording them for the show. And so I'm also a music teacher. I mean, I think that's part of the job. It's inherent to what I do, is helping a performer learn a new song. I mean, that's the basic ABC of it, is like, here's a new song, here's a lead sheet. If you want to use a lead sheet, if you want to use the script and just look at lyrics, the Sesame Street cast, they have a varied set of skills between all of them. Some of them have a music background, some of them don't. Some of them are just born natural singers. And the biggest variable that's not included in that definition is character voices. Like, as a music director, I am listening to character voices all day. So I'm not listening to, if you were to sing as a tenor, maybe your range is here as a tenor, but maybe your vocal range as that cast member, as that performer, is like a little bit less than that or wider than that. You might think of yourself as a tenor, but you might be humorously singing as an alto or a soprano, even like just silliness, falsetto, whatever. So I'm listening to those sounds every day because I'm also judging where I put the keys of songs for where the performer is most comfortable. So that gets into almost microscopic versions of what a music director does, because I'm helping that performer sing in character and staying in that range. And right when I got to Sesame Street, I was gifted the vocal range chart for all the characters that my predecessor, Dave Conner, gave to me. He was on the show for decades, I think almost maybe 30 years. And he had this whole list of the characters and their ranges, which is fascinating to look at, because again, you think of a person like a male or female. Okay, that person is a tenor, that person's an alto, but here's their character range. And I have to stay within that range, because if you're singing too high, it can sound strained and painful, or if you're too low, it gets out of character either way. If you go too high or too low, it can get out of character. So yeah, that's a good definition of music director. There's a bunch of additions and subtractions, I think.
Yeah.
One of the things that strikes me in just what you're communicating there is the fact that I think, working for a company like, Sesame Workshops or Sesame Street itself, it's an institution, right? I mean, they have their standards and they have their ways of doing things. And I guess the way that you just, communicated these ideas across is the expectations fall within, for example, these ranges, or this is what we want, this is what we need. And I'm guessing that part of your job is, when, of course, like you just mentioned, working with the cast and making sure that their sound is consistent, but then also working with guests who are coming on the program and letting them know, or working behind the scenes to ensure that they're falling within the parameters of what the show knows works, if this
Sure.
makes sense.
Yeah.
That's what
Well,
I'm picking up on here a little bit.
and with guests too, we always want to. They choose the key for whatever song they're singing because that's their song. Like if a
Yeah.
guest celebrity singer comes on, we will then arrange our vocals around them. So even if we're doing a classic song like "Sing" or "Welcome to the Party" or whatever, we will tailor it to that guest. If we're doing an original Sesame Street song for that guest, then our head music director and arranger, well, Bill Sherman's our head music director, our arranger Joe Feidler, they will kind of pick that key for that person, and they will basically arrange around that person or compose around that person. And I'm a composer as well. That's one of the other hats I wear on the show. And we have there's a dozen or so composers that write for the show. So when we are thinking about characters, I'm thinking as a composer what works best, even rhythmically for certain characters that will be singing. But a lot of what I do happens upstream. So if I'm working if I see a script come in with lyrics on it, that has upstream from me, that has been gone through in different versions. And what's the curriculum for the show? What is the lesson we're teaching? It could be happiness. It could be working together. It could be sharing. It could be any number of things. By the time it gets to me, those lyrics are all pretty much sorted out. And then I'm thinking about rhythm and how poetically the lyrics work together, and then applying it to the characters. So yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, I think when I tell people that, especially character voices, people think, "Oh yeah, that makes sense," because Elmo is a male tenor, but he sings in falsetto. My wife, Abby Cadabby, she has a very wide range. She does multiple characters, including Elmo's puppy Tango, which I could say Tango sings in character, but she's a natural alto, but she can sing as a soprano too in character, so yeah, it's really fun to dive into that. I don't consider myself a vocal coach or a vocal teacher, in that I'm not helping them with the craft of singing in character.
Yeah.
In other words, finding the muscle that works right for a character. That is something that they've already established that before they walk in my door in the studio to sing, right? So I might say, well, it's a little high there. Can you sing a little lighter? You know what I mean? I'll just throw that out there. And that's super generic terminology for a singer. But as long as that's kind of in their brain and they think about not pushing it too hard in a higher range, that can help them. So a day in the life on Sesame Street, if we're in the studio and we're actually filming the show, it's a solid 10 or 12-hour day of me pre-recording voices for a song that might be happening that day or next day or the day after. I am editing those vocals. I'm tweaking pitch and rhythm and things and just lining things up. Our performers are amazing, but it does take a little bit of editing just to kind of, if I've got 12 vocalists and they're all singing in character, I want those cutoffs to be right. I want the rhythms to be right.
Yep.
Again, that's the bar that was set. Although if you go way back and you listen to some stuff from the 70s, there's some pretty loose vocals going on, which I love because it's real. And I think our ears have really changed in the last 20 years or so with digital, because you can fix that rhythm that's just slightly off and be like, bang, those rhythms are all together. So I think it doesn't matter how old you are, your ears are now in tune with the digital audio and digital music that's happening today. So anyway, that's, two parts of what I do. Vocalist comes into my office, I record them, I edit them. I get a rough mix basically ready for the stage, and I'll send that to the director. I'll send that to my wonderful A2 who does playback on the show, send it to the head music director, make sure, everybody's okay with a rough mix. Send it to the performers, of course, so they can practice their lip syncing to the song. And then we basically deliver that song to the set. And Chris Cesano's our amazing A2. He does all the playback for us. So I'm on set with a headset. I'm communicating to him. I'm basically conducting the performers as they lip sync, which is very loose for me. I try not to be distracting because a puppeteer has a lot going on. They are in a sometimes a very awkward position. They're looking at a monitor, which is the same shot that you see when it goes to air. It's left is right and right is left. So it's backwards. So as they move, it does this. So they've got a lot to think about. There might be a basketball that's thrown into the shot that they have to think about catching while they're singing or whatever. So I'm literally on the floor, kind of within peripheral vision of them. And I'm basically just kind of giving them ins and outs. I'm not sitting there going 1, 2, 3, if we're like a drum major. I'm basically kind of helping them with a cutoff or an entrance or giving a 4, 3, 2, 1 to start. That's, for me, that's the best seat in the house because I've pre-recorded all the music. I've seen the script go through verse changes and such. Now this is it. This is what people will see and hear. 9 times out of 10, the biggest struggle is scheduling, and like timing out everything and getting enough time for people to come in the booth and record for an hour. Like that's really hard to do. Our season is very compressed in terms of the timing that we're given at the studio. And so it's also compressed in a sense where the scripts might have been written months before, the lyrics to the song might have been written months before, but there's still changes that are happening even up to the day we film that piece. There's often times where a composer, including myself, will look at lyrics and maybe take out a word or add a word because it sings a little better. And we'll run that by the producers. So there's still a lot of this nuts and bolts kind of things happening before we record. So scheduling is like the number one thing. I worked on another show called Helpsters, which was a Sesame Workshop, had a lot of involvement with that, and a lot of the same team, producers and audio tech and lighting, et cetera, was part of that show. That was a car wash of celebrities because we would have sometimes 1 or 2 a day, and we had these repeatable songs on that, and they'd have to come in the booth and sing these 3 repeatable songs. Every guest did that. So we had to know, okay, they're on set from 8 to 8 or 8 to 6 or whatever. And the producers have to tell me, okay, they've got 30 minutes here, slot you in there, but I'm in the same physical space as the A2 and the A1 recording and playing back on the show. So we're all on headphones trying to schedule this stuff. So, and then I was on a show called Julie's Green Room, which is Julie Andrews on a Netflix show. That scheduling was hard because literally the distance from the stage to my office was like this 5-minute walk at Grumman Studios out in Long Island. Huge, vast expanse of space. Literally physically to get from A to B would take time. So you had to add that into the day. So scheduling always.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds like it.
Yeah, I mean, musically, there's been specific times where we could solve a problem by just changing up whatever nuts and bolts were happening, like on the day. Like there's a specific instance with John Legend came on to do a wonderful song with us. We ended up using, I think, a year later on the Macy's Day Parade, called "We Come Together." Beautiful song, and I'm not even sure. I think Christopher Jackson wrote that. Anyway, we'd written him the song, we'd given him the demo, but he was right in the middle of press tour for La La Land, the movie that had just come out. This is back in this would have been fall of 2019. Anyway, plus he just had an album come out produced by Quincy Jones, so he's on a press tour for that. And we get him for like an hour and a half on Sesame Street, and he was beat. He was very tired. But he wanted to play and sing live, which he'd been on the show before, sang a song with Elmo, live, piano, all this. And so while we were rehearsing the song and started doing some takes, the puppeteers had a challenge too, because they had to be surrounded by this grand piano. So they had to be hidden behind this grand piano, which often has like black fabric duvetine hiding them. Very challenging for puppeteers to just come into these shots. And so I just went over to John Legend and I'm like, do you want to pre-record the piano? And he's like, can we do that? And I'm like, yes, because, and it changed everything because then he would have to be play syncing to his performance on piano, right? So we're going to
Yeah.
pre-record the piano. He's going to now we have to switch up like headphones and all the physical things on the set. He has to have invisible in-ears, so it looks like he's playing live. He definitely still sang live, but I could see that after a couple takes, I'm like, we're probably asking him to do too much because he's so taxed right now.
Right.
I could
Right.
kind of sense that. And still consummate pro musician. I mean, ready to take it on, but that was my suggestion. I'm like, I think we could probably do this with a pre-record. So that ended up really helping that performer on that day. But that's a one-time thing. That's
Yeah.
never happened since. It might never happen again, but it worked, on that day. Well, for one thing, it's networking for sure, and if I could talk to my 20-year-old self or my 29-year-old self when I moved to LA, I would I would emphasize more of networking, not the schmoozing part of it, but just being able to send a resume out or send a reel out or send some demos out and say, hey, this is what I do. I think I might be, good for your project. And I've had discussions with college age students and high school students and saying that very thing because they have at their fingertips the digital online world. They can look on IMDb and say, okay, I loved this composer on this film. I would love to reach out to them. They can find that person on IMDb easily. Whereas for me, having that connection with the friend who was the film scoring agent,
Yeah.
that was a foot in the door. My other foot in the door was working in studios in LA. That's how I got my 10-year gig with these commercial composers, was through Capitol Studios. My good friend Paula Salvador at Capitol knew all these different composers and arrangers and musicians coming in the door to record at Capitol. And she had learned that these two composers were looking for an assistant, studio assistant, and she recommended me for that job. So that's another one person through my connections and my networking that she saw what I did on Muppets Tonight, even with working with musicians and the vocalists and the producers and directors on that. So she knew my skill set. And I think,
Yeah.
the other thing I would tell young people too is to keep updated on technology, because even though we are now entrenched in the digital world, when I was in it, it was analog switching to digital. So there was a learning curve for everybody. I work in Pro Tools every day. Back in the mid to late 90s, they called it Pro Fools because it wasn't working very well. Of course, that was very early on. So after
Mhm.
now I'm 16 years on Sesame Street, that's every day I'm working in that. So keeping up on technology, keeping up on even OS updates. The computer I'm on right now is 5 years old. Definitely need a new one.
Yeah.
But so networking, technology, keeping up, on your craft and your skill set is one thing. And I think my wife says this every day to young people: what is your passion, and what's the thing that you can do just outside of that world that just still inspires you artistically?
Hmm.
And that was something I learned too from Jerry Nelson, who was the Count and a mentor of mine. He and I, he had a bunch of original songs that I ended up music directing for him to release on a CD called Truro Daydreams, which he released in 2009. Wonderful songs, non-Sesame Street songs, not Muppet songs, some funny
Hmm.
songs, some serious songs, some blues. He was a wonderful singer and guitarist. And he told me, because I sat down, had a chat with him about the freelance world and how Sesame was slow at times and busy at times. And
Hmm.
he's like, find your art outside of this that you can just do and relax and have fun with, and not think about that 9 to 5 bill paying part, which is hard. As a
Yeah.
freelancer, it's really hard. It's hard for me even today after doing this since I was 29. That artistic inspiration has really anchored me, I think, to what is my craft, the vibraphone, and playing that and
Hmm.
having fun and playing with all my toys here.
Yeah.
Just keeping that in your back pocket. Like, even
Yeah.
if it's just sketching, if it's taking a pencil out and going to Central Park and drawing a tree, well, then that's it. Great. That's your outlet.
Yeah.
You need
Yeah.
that artistically.
Well, I think part of it too is just it's coming down to recognizing. I'm going to use that word again that we were speaking about earlier, the zone. You
Yeah.
find yourself in the zone, and recognizing it. If you can pull yourself out of that moment just for a millisecond and realize, like, okay, this is giving me immense joy right now, and
Right.
that
Right.
probably is a big sort of like sign or trigger that you probably want to pursue this further. If it's not
Yeah.
if it's not hurting anyone else, this is probably a
Right.
good thing for you, right?
Yeah,
And
indeed. And I mean, I'm so fortunate to work a job that I absolutely love with people that are incredible and a legacy like Sesame Street and the other shows that were new shows. Just watching these people all come together and produce this
yeah.
product has just been incredible.
Well, I do hope that you found that video to be both helpful and insightful. And if you want to hear more about Paul and his work, be sure to check out the full-length audio version. There we dive into much more. More in the way of rewards and challenges, more in the way of tips and strategies for you, so you can find a great career within the music industry. As well, Paul shares his story of how he made his way from a high school music classroom all the way to Hollywood and onto Sesame Street. He also shares this really great story of when Usher was a celebrity guest on the program and his interaction with him. There's a bunch there. You're not going to want to miss any of it. And again, you can find the audio version wherever you access your podcast. Just do that search for Life as a ... And finally, once again, would really love that like or subscribe. We're a small channel trying to do good in this world, and every little bit helps. Anyhow, I will have another video coming for you right next week, so don't miss it. All right, until then, we'll see ya.